we should talk for a bit about how world wars happen. 1, because the world looks like this right now. 2, because it is on the verge of looking like this. 3, because in things that did not get discussed in the news due to Iran and Israel getting all of the attention, this happened. Welcome, by the way, to the party, the Philippines. 4, because North Korea just has impeccable timing with these things as well. 5, because some earlier dominoes falling in Russia and then Syria are how we got to the current aerial war between Israel and Iran. And 6, because there is an agenda item on next week's NATO Heads of State Summit that might help mitigate the problem. Now, if you will permit me to catch my breath as we look at an extremely Dutch photo, let's talk about World War III. What defines a world war seems like a good starting point. It is not just that a whole bunch of pairs of countries are all engaged in various wars at the same time. It is that they are all somehow connected to one another, and what happens on one front will affect all of the others, either directly or indirectly through a third conflict. In fact, it is that interconnectivity that creates the risk of a broader conflict starting, for no reason other than other conflicts are happening. Something like Russia invaded Ukraine, which caused Israel to begin bombing Iran, which then entangles the United States in the process, which triggers a mainland invasion of Taiwan, which prompts North Korea to attack South Korea, as well as a subcontinental showdown between India and Pakistan. It is basically a series of dominoes falling over, except instead of having the mild inconvenience of having to pick them all up afterward, you have tens of millions of dead bodies to bury. Or maybe they will just be vaporized, thereby sparing us the trouble. The joys of nuclear annihilation aside, we should spend a moment discussing how exactly world wars come about. Not too long ago, we examined this problem in the context of the Trump Doctrine. The key phrase is wars of opportunism, and the idea is straightforward if you understand some simple lines on maps logic. Let's review it from the perspective of Taiwan, since that war has not started. Yet. Under normal circumstances, we have the two parties in the midst of a contentious peace. Neither one is exactly happy about the way the world works for them. But trying to militarily change that will only make the problem worse because of the costs and risks involved. That is, they both understand roughly what the outcome of a war between them would be, in terms of the likelihood that the mainland wins, versus Taipei maintaining control of its own sovereignty. They also recognize that a whole bunch of costs will result from a war, which perhaps they internalize in terms of sovereignty in the manner seen here. Thus, rather than fight, they preserve a weird division of Taiwanese sovereignty that is roughly in line with that war expectation. It's better for everyone that way. The problem is that the world around them is a busy one, filled with other conflicts. And a war between the PRC and Taiwan is not a war between the PRC and Taiwan. It is a war between the PRC and Taiwan and the United States and Japan and South Korea and perhaps more. Heck, maybe Russia will help out the other side. Beijing could only be so lucky. The thing is, though, that help presupposes that it is available. The United States would like to help Taiwan, sure, but maybe it is busy with Iran at the moment. Emphasis on the at the moment qualifier. Indeed, the momentary weakness creates a window of opportunity for the mainland. With the United States sidetracked, the PRC's ability to conquer Taiwan will significantly increase. But, critically, only while that distraction continues. The concern for fans of global stability is that what the PRC expects to win during that window of opportunity, even after accounting for its costs of war, is better than the greatest degree of sovereignty that Taiwan could begrudgingly concede to the mainland once the United States is no longer distracted. See, these demands are not compatible, and that is a war of opportunism. Moreover, This is not a hypothetical discussion of the current global crisis that we are witnessing. Let me take you back in time for a moment. Because Russia was first distracted and then exhausted by a much longer war than expected in Ukraine, Azerbaijan took the opportunity to renew the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in September 2023. Similarly, the reason that the decisive offensive in the Syrian civil war happened in December 2024 was again because Russia could not muster a response. Heck, we can trace the current aerial war between Iran and Israel back to that. While chaos reigned in Syria, Israel took the opportunity to take out Syria's air defenses. That also sounds like a strike of opportunism. Today, Israeli planes are taking a route across the helpless Syria, through the friendly skies of Kurdish Iraq, and over to Iran to drop their payloads. Assad's fall solved one of the biggest problems that had vexed hawkish Israelis, who wanted to attack Iran's program for decades. How the heck do you actually get over there safely? And it is also something that might not last forever, depending on the direction of the Syrian government and how fast it may reacquire air defenses. You know, if we really wanted to dive deep into this, another reason that Israel is doing this now is because Israel had absolutely battered Hezbollah after Hezbollah thought it was a good idea to fight following Hamas's attack, which itself largely happened because Hamas was worried that Israel and Saudi Arabia would align together. The only reason that we have not gone into a full world war is because there has not been enough strain on the system. Yet. But things like an American intervention into Iran, coupled with a hefty response against U.S. bases in the region, or the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, or an unconventional attack on the U.S. homeland, or an internal rebellion putting pressure on the Ayatollah, adding some lions on maps, and encouraging the United States to keep going. All of those things could be just enough to push the world over the edge. That is how you get the PRC invading Taiwan, the United States trying to tie that down, a clash in Korea, India taking the opportunity to revisit some disputed regions that it has with its communist neighbor, Pakistan deciding that then would be a good time to capture Kashmir, Saudi Arabia doing who knows what with Iran, and maybe Yemeni Houthis as well. And after that, your guess is as good as mine. Let the dominoes fall where they may be. The situation is not hopeless, however. There is something that can be done to solve the problem. A solution to the opportunism, if you will. It will be expensive, but then again, the alternative may be even more expensive. You have likely heard about the new defense spending target of 5% of GDP that will be the centerpiece of next week's NATO summit. Well, that is exactly the type of thing that counteracts the opportunism incentive. Back during the Cold War, you may recall that the United States operated under a two-war construct, the idea that it should always have enough military force to handle two conflicts simultaneously. It cost the United States a whole lot of money, but it served a purpose. It prevented the start of one war triggering another war through the domino effect. Well, then the Cold War came to an end, and U.S. military power has slowly eroded to the point where it definitely is a one-war construct. If we jump ahead to NATO's 2014 Wales Summit, you started to get a pushback. It was the site of the declaration that 2% of GDP should be spent on defense, which is today's status quo. Part of the goal there was to give NATO as a whole a two-war construct, specifically designed so that increased European defense spending could handle a conflict with Russia, while the United States would handle security affairs in the Indo-Pacific. Remember, this was the era of the attempted Obama pivot. The problem for today is that the scale of the potential conflicts has increased. 2% of GDP may not be enough to cover the situation. Trump's foreign policy frames itself as a prioritization imperative, where this time the United States is really pivoting to Asia, and the United States really means it. But that does not change how the fates of Europe and the United States are still intertwined. Nor does it change how there are still mutual interests in the Middle East that Europe does not have the capacity to cover, but that the United States does. In fact, you might remember that this disconnect came up in the leaked Signal chat. Now, what might be able to handle that is spending an additional 1.5% of GDP by the entire alliance, including an increase in US defense spending. 3.5% total is a lot of money to throw around. And bear in mind here that the gain is not just from the direct additional coercive power that having more arms gives you. It is also the deterrent power of stopping countries from initiating a war of opportunism and imposing all of the corresponding costs of conflict on you. Perhaps equally important is what accounts for the remaining 1.5% that takes the states all the way up to the full 5%. That is supposed to include infrastructure spending, which immediately conjures up thoughts of bridges that would help deploy the hardware. But might it include a broader defense industrial base as well? Because wars of opportunism are not just about an initial distraction. They are also about attrition. If a major war persists for years, shell hunger may eventually empty your warehouses, at which point you are a golden target for opportunism. And to further the problem, wars of opportunism themselves tend to last a long time. You will recall how most wars end in some type of negotiated settlement. If, for example, there is a disagreement over the eventual outcome of a conflict, the war itself reveals that information, and thus resolves the bargaining friction that caused the war to start in the first place. Well, a war of opportunism begins because of a moment of vulnerability. Fighting does not reveal meaningful information in this case. The parties are at war because they know the consequences of what will happen, and one of them finds the alternative even worse. So increasing defense spending is not just about stopping any old war. It is about stopping the wars that are most likely to be especially destructive. Might 5% be the answer? Again, that is a question for the heads of state at The Hague, and it is worth noting that there is no guarantee there. But the problem is not about to go away. Even if the United States does not end up fighting an elongated war with Iran, the underlying security environment is not looking good right now. Meanwhile, if you want to learn more about the first domino, these 2 books on the Russia-Ukraine war are a fantastic starting point. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.